Welcome everyone back to the Charismatic Voice. I am so honored to be joined here today by Myles Kennedy. Myles, thank you so much for taking time to have a conversation with me.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
I'm super excited to talk shop with you because I know that you have been studying with a classical teacher, and I think it's going to be really interesting to understand how you've taken that and put it into more metal and different kinds of styles as well. So I think that's going to be super fun. But
Right on.
before, the most necessary question to begin the interview with is coffee or tea?
Today we are drinking tea, and I'm drinking what is it? Chamomile and ginger. So
Ooh.
I'm actually a coffee guy a lot of the time. And I'm trying to stop. I also have my coffee here as well. But
I love that you brought both.
yeah, it's like double fisting here. I'm good to go. But yeah, I think I'm trying to wean myself off of coffee because I've noticed that it actually, singers, as you know, reflux is the enemy.
Oh, it's so bad.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely something that the coffee seems to trigger that. So I'm having to pull back my massive quantities every morning, which is a drag because I love coffee. I mean, it's just like, oh, it's so good. But
I do love tea, but I also sometimes coffee. Like, it depends on how those beans are roasted. For me, if
Right.
it's like more of a medium, then I tend to like that better. And if it's just like really smooth, it's amazing. But oh boy, yeah, it does wreak havoc on reflux.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and that's not good. That is definitely not good for the vocal cords. So
Yeah.
I've had to
Is that
curtail
something that you've dealt with for a while?
Yeah, it is actually. I think yeah, especially as the years go on, it's something that is just more. I'll notice it during shows. I'm like, oh shoot, I had some spicy food before the gig, and now that's kind of screwing with things. And
Yeah.
so yeah, it's getting the diet's getting pretty bland, and the the beverage of choice is it's becoming more and more water as opposed to the wonderful taste of coffee in the morning. But hey, it's all about the show. It's all about maintaining, and also ultimately maintaining this. I don't want to. I've heard horror stories about people who let it go, and then, it kind of screws with their pipes.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think it's like you have to kind of like really be on the maintaining it level,
Right.
especially
Right.
when you start to get older. It's like that pliability isn't something you can really get back too easily. There's things you can do to
Exactly.
help, but yeah, totally. It's so interesting though. I know for reflux, there have been so many different techniques, or I shouldn't say techniques, like different kinds of medications that people use to help with it, different diets to help with it. I've had a lot of discussions about that recently. So I was curious. Do you ever use like a Gaviscon or something like that to treat it?
No, I just try to kind of watch my diet and just be real. I don't like taking a lot of medicines, and I try to avoid it, but it's definitely something that I'm very aware of certain beverages, certain foods, and it's just like, well, just cut that out, and hopefully it'll alleviate the issue.
Mm-hmm. And most people, like, they might have some reflux, but it doesn't really matter to them because they're not using their vocal folds all the time, and they're not aware of all of the intricate movements and things that they need to be able to do with them, or they're not
Right.
singing at the top of their range. And
Right.
so the reflux is just kind of whatever. But I've read a few different things. I know opera singers in particular tend to get reflux pretty severely. And there are a lot of different theories for why this happened. And one of them is just that singers in general are using their diaphragm so much,
Right.
and that it's pumping against their stomach, which essentially would cause reflux to stir up more.
That actually, I never thought about that. That's actually a good point. Because yeah, you're supporting with that, with the whole area is right around your stomach, and I'm assuming that's going to, as you're pushing the air, it's also going to push other things that you don't really want
Right.
that are supposed to stay down. So yeah.
Yeah, you're like, come on, dude, don't do that too. Right. But I think you're totally right. I just treating it with diet, if you can manage it with that first, is always going to be best.
Right.
You don't have anything
Yeah.
else going on in your system that could also be affecting your vocal folds.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just, there's so many as you know, there's just so many variables as a singer that you have to pay attention to. It's like, you gotta think about sleeping, and you gotta think about, your allergies, and have you been eating the right foods? And so, as I always say, you're carrying your instrument with you at all times. A guitar, I started as a guitar player, and I like the fact that I can just take my guitar, put it in a case, and when I'm not
Right?
using it. But with this, I have to be aware of it at all times, and that's sometimes a bit of a burden. But hey, I'm grateful. I don't want to sound like I'm complaining.
Yeah, no, I feel you on that though too. Also playing piano, same thing. You're like, oh well, I can just poke a note.
Right.
Nice.
Exactly.
Well, you mentioned allergies, so let's talk about Eastern Washington.
Yeah.
I'm originally from Wenatchee, so I
you
was
are?
like, oh yeah, right. Hi,
No kidding.
Eastern Washington.
I know Wenatchee well. So my parents
you?
lived in my parents lived in Kashmir.
Oh my gosh, that's where my aunt and uncle live.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time there too.
Aplets and cotlets.
Yes. Which I hated when I was younger, if I'm honest. And then I got older and was like, wow, but these are great.
Right. I know. I was the same way. I thought they were horrible when I was a kid. And then suddenly you get to a point where you're like, it's not so bad. It's not so bad. Yeah, but Kashmir. And then Leavenworth right down the way, the beautiful little like Bavarian village. I don't know how that.
It's so charming.
It's
right?
it's amazing. It's amazing.
I took my husband there when we were visiting our family in the summer. I took him to Leavenworth for the first time, and it's just, I think the first time you're there, you look around and you're like, what happened?
Right?
How's a Bavarian village in the middle of Washington State?
I know, right? It's pretty wild. It's pretty, but it is cool. So yeah, Eastern Washington, and yes, allergies are a thing here for sure. Faux show. Yeah.
The allergies, especially, I think, because everything has just this really short period to bloom.
Right.
And so when it happens, it is just like, okay, we might not sing for a month.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
It's
What do you do?
intense.
What do you do? So you have allergies?
Yeah, I have allergies. I really struggled with them. Actually, at one point I had allergies so bad that it caused me to have vocal nodes too, which is just like, right? I know. You put that together with singing opera, and it was a horrible situation. Right. So I went to both working with like a really good voice teacher and a really good otolaryngologist / allergist, was specializing in both. They helped me through it. They helped me learn which medications don't affect the voice as much. And they also had me do immunotherapy, so drops underneath my tongue.
Right.
So that helped reduce the impact a lot. They're not totally gone, but at least I know, essentially I don't take the medications usually that are systemic. So I won't swallow a pill unless I absolutely have to. I'm much more likely to use nasal sprays, a neti pot for sure, tons of that, and then just stay super hydrated. Right. So
right.
It's challenging. It's really challenging. And when I was coming back to Washington State, often I would do summer gigs in Washington State. Like, I don't know if you know about the Lake Chelan Bach Festival.
No,
It's a big festival around J.S. Bach. Anyhow, I would come back and do that during the summers a lot. And I really had to manage the allergies in that situation.
Yeah, it's brutal. Now you did this. So you did the drops under your tongue. So like the I think I did those for a while as well, and those did help.
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't totally take it away, but it certainly made it more kind of controllable.
Yeah, exactly. It was more, you can manage it then.
You're right.
It was a big difference for me. It's the difference between having nodules when you have allergies or not. Right. That's huge.
Right.
But also in Eastern Washington, there isn't a whole lot of opportunity for performance. So I recently saw a video of you busking on the streets. I think it was in Spokane. This is actually, it's probably not that recent. I think it was from 2016, but I saw it yesterday. So it feels recent. Uh, is that something that you still do in Spokane? And is that done very often in Spokane? It's kind of still a small city.
Yeah. So what that was actually for it was for a charity. It was for it's to raise money
Yay.
for the food bank here. So I had a
Uh-huh.
friend and he has this thing called it. He basically does it every June, and he has his friends come down and gig on the streets. And
Hmm.
so he asked me to come down, and I think I played Watch Over You.
Yeah.
And
And when I'm gone, oh, break your fall. Oh, will you I can't go on and let you lose it all. More than I can say. Oh, see, it's your pain. It's your pain.
Yeah.
yeah, and so yeah, it's kind of a tradition here in Spokane. I think it's every June, and so that was fun.
Well, that's awesome. And, that leads directly into something else I wanted to ask you about, which is looking at your track record. It seems like you've been really involved in community and community service and helping raise money for charities. I know you started a charity with your wife in 2015, right?
Yeah, the Future Song Foundation, and my wife and I, and some of our friends, we raise money to help our community, like it's musically driven. So we try and get instruments for folks who can't get instruments, can't acquire instruments, or private instruction. And we even recently set up like a scholarship thing at one of the community colleges for
Oh,
same
nice.
music program I went through,
The
the
jazz one?
SFCC. Yeah, the SFCC Jazz Studies
Nice.
program. You know about this program.
I know a little bit about it. Actually, I marked it in some notes ahead of time because I was like, that's the jazz program that I heard about when I was growing up. It's pretty good, right?
It was, it was amazing. Like when I was really fortunate to get to experience that, because there was some legit knowledge being dropped, and so
Uh-huh.
I learned how to arrange for a big band. Not that I've ever used that skill, but I just learned all this really
Whoa.
amazing stuff that helped kind of send me on my way as a young musician.
Wait, you learned how to arrange for a big band.
I did. I studied arranging with a gentleman named Bob Kernow, who is he's amazing, and he was actually one of those teachers that really helped in the beginning with
Mhm.
and him, and there's my guitar teacher Joe Brash, and just some really just top notch talent at this school. But yeah, I had to arrange for my final, the final paper, so to speak. I had to arrange. I took a song, a standard called Green Dolphin Street, and I arranged it for a big band, and that was. It was funny because I spent so much time learning how to do that, and I've never once utilized any of those skills. In fact, that was so long ago, I don't know if I can remember any of it.
But at the same time, when you're learning how to write for so many different instruments and how they can pair up, I mean, that must affect how you write now.
I think it certainly has helped me it's helped me figure out where to place things, especially as when I'm demoing songs. I'm in the middle of demoing right now
Mm.
for the next Alter Bridge record. I've been just hunkered down in
Ooh.
the studio writing nonstop, and I'm getting to the point now where the demos are they're very realized. It's essentially, I just hand the song over and say, well, here's what I'm hearing in my head, and as you play the parts, you're looking for to it's the same thing I learned when I was arranging for big bands, which is you're filling the holes.
Yeah.
Everything has its place, and I think that has been really helpful for me as the years have gone, especially as a composer, and
Hmm.
also as a singer, because you realize you don't want to walk all over everything, and you find your place, and
Yeah.
you do what's appropriate for the song. You play for the song at the end of the day.
It's like you've got to find little pockets for each sound that's coming in and know how to place
Exactly.
them. I love,
Exactly.
like, it sounds like you're working with the spatialization too within just headphones, or, and how the music is laid out um, in an imaginary space. And I love that you can connect that to the way that a big band has so many members, or from my point of view, I also think about an orchestra and the members, and how a lot of times when we perceive music, we think, oh, it's just coming from like one source. I'm going to listen to a song. And instead, I feel like a lot of really good records today, it's not I'm going to listen to a song, I'm going to be surrounded by a song. And it feels amazing when somebody takes attention to detail and drops all of these things in. It's so cool.
Yeah, I'm with you. There's something about listening to music when it's done correctly, when you know the composer and the producer and the arranger or whatever have put everything in its appropriate place, and it certainly heightens the experience for sure.
Yeah, that's super awesome. And it's just so cool to think about going from jazz and then taking that information and going into metal and rock, and saying, okay, well, wow, that's a trajectory. One thing in particular I wanted to check on was the harmonies in jazz. For me, that I always thought that jazz had some of the most interesting and creative harmonies, and I felt like it was more explorational in a lot of ways. And that seems to maybe, possibly, I don't know if it does, but I would think that that would translate into prog. Do you think that that does translate?
Sure. Yeah, because you're thinking, I think just the standard, okay, we're just going to put a third above the tonic, right? And that's fine, but there's something that can really beautiful that can happen when you start experimenting with those harmonies, and you start adding some ninths in there, and you start making the chords expensive. That's the thing. You don't, and it's tricky because it's funny, like with harmonically speaking, like my education as a jazz guy, the things that we embraced harmonically were the third and the seventh. A lot of times you could omit the tonic and the fifth. Like it wasn't, those were like kind of like, well, what's important is that when you're like, when I was doing arrangements for big band, it's like, make sure that you're getting that third and that seventh in there. We'll figure out, and then some of the, then add a ninth, a 13th, and make it sound expensive. But what's funny is in rock, like the power chord, the foundation of like 90% of what you hear is the tonic and the fifth. It's like they were like the ones that the jazz guys didn't want, and the rock guys were like, okay, we'll take those two notes and we'll build an entire genre around it, So yeah, I think for me, I don't want it to get too advanced. Like if I'm coming up with harmonies, I don't want to take the listener into, we're not going to go on a jazz odyssey, it's a rock band, but you can get experimental. I feel like ninths are really nice. There's something about that there's a little, almost that tension there between the tonic and the, which is kind of cool. But yeah, I just usually let my ear, it's whatever I'm hearing. I try not to overthink it. I try not to be like, oh, well, I'm going to turn this into a whatever chord and it's going to be all fancy. Most of the time I'm just using my melodic sense.
That makes sense, right? You don't want to over intellectualize the music.
Exactly.
It has a little more feel in it. That also makes sense. I feel like with you and the performances that I've seen you do, you seem so emotionally in tune with it. Like the main conduit is the emotion, right? It doesn't seem to be something that is really up here. I see you using your brain to inform great decisions, but at the same time, I feel that you are focused on expression, and that's awesome.
Isn't that kind of what we're here for, is to convey emotion? I mean, that's the beauty of art and music, is to take what's happening here and use the tools we were given or that we've developed with the voice, or you play piano or whatever it is, to convey an emotion and a feeling. And I think that is, what a gift, right? And we're so lucky. To be able to have that opportunity to express something to our fellow humanoids, and hopefully make them feel something. It's something that I really I'm really, really grateful for. And I don't know if I was as aware of it when I started playing music, like what it all meant. But as the years have gone on and I see how music affects people and I know how it's affected me and how it's kind of become in a lot of ways my saving grace and salvation. And it's like, it's about that emotion. It's about just expressing that universal element.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was my turning point in deciding that I really wanted to pursue voice. Was a specific moment in I don't know if you remember like the solo and ensemble competition.
Yeah.
I
remember those.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's so I remember at the state level for like classical singing essentially. I remember in that competition my senior year singing this song called Nuvoletta, and at the end she jumps off of a balcony and you're kind of not really sure what happens. Like there's an amazing crescendo and decrescendo, and it just maybe she floats away. I remember seeing people lean forward in their seats, and I realized at that moment how much music can affect a person. You draw them in and have their heart beat faster with mine. That's amazing.
Right.
It's really, really special. And
It really is.
yeah, I feel the moment you understand that and understand that you have the ability to pass this emotion to other people and help, maybe make their life more vibrant. It's just so beautiful. You can't not do it after that.
Right. Yeah, because it gives you purpose, right? I mean, it really makes you realize that you're here for a reason. You're not just using up oxygen. Although if I have a bad gig, then ask me that question. I'm like, I just used up oxygen, but yeah, it really is. It's just that, and I think with anything as a person, while we're here, which is a pretty short period when you really think about it,
Yeah.
You want to do something that has meaning, and what a better way than to make other people happy or make them feel like they're the emotions they like. For example, if you sing a melancholy song, one could look at that and say, why would you want to sing something sad? Well, I think it's because when people hear something sad or dark or melancholy, it's that, I don't know. I think it's knowing that somebody else has felt that and articulated it and expressed it in a certain way, and that you're not in this alone. And that's really important.
Yeah, that I think that they don't feel alone. Yeah,
Right.
I think that's so important. Yeah, too. Total same page.
Yeah.
Oh, it's beautiful. So obviously you're very passionate in sharing the music and singing on stage, and you're also sharing and building up your community with all kinds of various structures of support that you designed too. And then also, I know you've done a lot of teaching, and I'd like to actually ask a little bit about the teaching. I've done a bunch of teaching too. I still teach a bunch. I found that I love it because it feels like you're nurturing a person to feel more fulfilled in themselves as well, share their message, their unique message, which I think is incredible. And I also love teaching kids because those aha moments and the way that their brain lights up is so adorable. But what do you like about teaching? And do you think it's really positively impacted your own singing, or do you maybe think it takes away from it?
Well, what's interesting is I've never actually taught vocals. And when I was teaching, it was all guitar. I don't know if I could teach the voice, to be totally honest with you. It's something that, I studied with an awesome teacher, and though I have those techniques now, I've kind of integrated them into what I do. I don't know how good I would be at conveying that. Now with guitar, it's different. For some reason, guitar, the way it lays out, and because of the way I learned, I have a real easy time, taking that information and transferring it to someone else. And yeah, I did that for years. I mean, when I started teaching guitar about a year after I started playing, and just a little bit like, I could get some, money to buy some more strings or whatever. And it was baby steps. And then by the time I was about, I don't know, probably 20, then I was teaching during the day. So I'd teach for about, 2 to 3 hours in the afternoon, and then I'd go gig at night. So for playing cover bands for another 4 hours. So I was just immersed in it constantly. And I learned a lot from teaching. I learned a lot about how to not only to approach things from a theory standpoint, but and obviously technique and all that. But it also was great because I'd have students bring in songs that they wanted to learn, and I would have never thought of learning them myself. And interestingly enough, I remember this one very young person. He was a massive Jimi Hendrix fan, and he'd bring in find these live Jimi Hendrix recordings, and I'd learn all these Jimi Hendrix riffs and licks. And it's funny because years later, I'm still playing some of those licks, and I got them. I got them from showing somebody else. So yeah, it was a really beneficial element of my I think my playing in particular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really does expand knowledge of repertoire, I would say, when you're teaching others.
Absolutely.
That's
Absolutely.
a very cool aspect of it. Well, I wanted to ask a couple other things before we dive into vocal technique, because I really want to,
Okay.
get in and talk about that opera sort of teaching and how that's affected you. But one of the things I was really curious about after reading some is I think I saw that you have tinnitus, a ringing in the ear, and that hasn't gone away with time, right?
Unfortunately, I hear it loud and clear as we speak. Yeah, it's kind of there, and I just I've just kind of work around it, and it could be a lot worse. Once I've realized that I had it, and I became very aware of how loud I was listening to music, and it really, it became kind of a good thing because I started being very, very careful. And now when I go in and get my ears tested, they always comment, they're like, wow, for somebody who's been doing it as long as you have, your ears are still holding up pretty well. So I think it was because I got that tinnitus scare. It was like, it's the body's way of saying, hey, you need to turn it down a little bit, son. So, so it was just, I tried to take lemons and turn it into lemonade and try and look at it optimistically. And I have, it's funny. I was talking with somebody recently who also has tinnitus, and we were, there was like a fan in the background, and he was like, how loud is your tinnitus? And I said, well, it's about on par with that fan. And he's like, oh, that's nothing. He told me how loud his was, and I was like, oh, geez, that would drive me crazy. So yeah, it's manageable. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. Does it stay at a certain pitch?
It does. Yeah. It's just, yeah, it's, boo. Yeah, that's about it, except it's much higher, but, yeah, it's the little voice in my head. It's like my buddy,
So you could technically harmonize with it. You could use
probably
it to help,
could
make sure.
Yeah, I probably could. And it's weird though, because it's almost like some people say when they go to sleep at night, it drives them crazy. For me, it's almost comforting. I don't know. I think it's just, yeah, it's just always there. So I'm never totally alone.
That's amazing. I like you have such a positive outlook on a lot of things. Like I feel like you think, oh, it could be this, but I'm going to look at it this way. And to me, that's indication of a person who has often had some tough times and has learned how to sort of reshape how they approach things mentally. And I noticed that you specifically took a break, I think in 2002, to work through some depression, right? Did I get that right?
Yeah, I was working through there were a lot of issues going on. Yeah, I've struggled with anxiety and like depression and all that. So I think it probably started when I was a teenager, but, look, that's one of the great things about having music as an outlet is like, I've always been able to channel that and use, in a lot of ways I use it. It's like the thing about having, I always refer to them as the monsters of the mind, and having that element there, you can channel that dialogue and that narrative into your songwriting. And So there's never a shortage of things to tap into. And yeah, I mean, that's once again, it goes back to the music conversation where I'm so grateful to have that. I can't imagine. And that's part of the reason that we wanted to start this foundation, the Future Song Foundation. It was like the idea of being a young person and not having a way to channel that, to me is, that's terrifying. And, I think sometimes people are like, oh, music programs, because music programs have been cut from schools and it's kind of looked at as this thing that's not important. And as somebody who found his solace in music, it's crucial. It's like oxygen for me. So, yeah, I think that we're doing the best we can to just try and make sure that if you want to play music, you can do it.
My follow-up question for you was actually going to be, what would you recommend for people that are struggling with depression? And I think you just answered it. Go channel it through music.
Yeah, I mean, if music's your thing, but if music's not your thing, find something that you love and follow. This is my motto. I got this from Joseph Campbell, but it's, follow your bliss. And I think that look, I don't want to make any of the things pertaining to anxiety or depression. I don't want people to think that I'm thinking that's easy to it's not. It's a beast, but there's certainly things you can do to try and make it easier to deal with. And once again, then it leads you into that purpose, like we talked about earlier. You find your purpose, and it helps you work through some of that.
Yeah. I've also struggled and been there, and just, I think it's so important to talk about and so important to say there are ways to work through this. You can be happy again.
Yeah. Just don't give up, and don't allow yourself to fall into that deep, dark black hole, because it has a way of, it almost turns into like an echo chamber, like a feedback loop. If you allow it to do that. And I think I realized at a certain point, I was like, I've had enough of this. And that's not to say there aren't times when it rears its ugly head again, and you have to deal with it. But if you have some way of channeling it, or some way of trying to readdress the narrative, then it's very helpful. At least it's been helpful for me.
I love that, readdress the narrative too, because that's even in our conversation, I hear that that's something, the way that you phrase things and shift them. It's really important. It's always like adding a little positivity here. Here's my lemonade. Right.
Here's my lemonade. Yeah.
I love lemonade. Lemonade's really good. Okay.
Who doesn't? But once again, the problem with lemonade and reflux, not such a good combination.
Like, maybe not right before singing. Okay, fine.
Exactly.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit. About this bel canto background. So, Ron Anderson, right? That's the name of the teacher. Do you still study with him?
I haven't studied with Ron in probably 5 years, but we keep in contact. Once we follow each other on social media, and he is awesome. But yeah, I really do. Get me started talking about Ron, and I'm just like, those who've heard me talk about singing know this about me. But I'm so grateful to him, and so grateful to that knowledge that he helped bestow upon me at 20 some odd years ago, because I would have probably, so many singers who've been doing it for a long time, especially in the hard rock category, you can burn through those vocal cords pretty quickly if you're not doing it right. Right.
So what are some of the, I think I read recently that you said he unlocked the keys to the kingdom or something like this for you. And so, I immediately assumed that some of it's going to be about breath support.
Oh yeah. Right.
So how do you think about your breath now?
Yeah, what he told me is that it's all about the breath. It's all about the placement. It's all about essentially how you're allowing it to move across the back. You've raised your soft palate, and as you're ascending and going higher, and how to think about that and how to reapproach the vowels. So you're creating space. So there's nothing. All you're doing is just letting it happen, and you're floating. And I think that was one of the things he said early on that really stuck with me, is the idea that it should just float. It should be effortless. There should be no strain. There should be no, clamping down. The minute you start doing that, then the whole thing is out of it. As he once said, the motor will just not run right. I remember that. He said that in one of the lessons, and you have to allow it to be free and to stay. And it's like with so many things in life, it's about staying relaxed. It's all about releasing all the tension and allowing the breath to flow. And yeah, for me, it starts at the diaphragm. It starts at kind of the muscles he said once, it's kind of the muscles you pee with. It's like,
that's actually kind of true, like all the way down to your pelvic floor,
right.
essentially.
Yeah, it's
those
essentially
are your lowest
what it,
breath muscles.
Exactly. And so as I'm going higher and I hit my brake, then there's a little tap right at my brake, just a little bump. And that helps kind of get it across as my chest voice is moving into my head voice.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
That makes so much sense. Okay, and as far as registers go, just so we're clear, because people use different names for different registers. So do you think chest, head, falsetto, or do you think chest, mixed head?
Kind of mixed. I think mixed.
Yeah, mixed?
I mean, I think that's the beauty of these techniques, is that it makes it sound like you're using your chest voice, but you're actually using that blend, which is really, really cool.
Yeah. It's so interesting to me that people, ultimately, it doesn't really matter what you call a registration. The reason we have those names is so that we can understand how certain shifts might happen or how certain things might feel, right?
Exactly.
Really cool. Okay, so you're talking about like when you flip over into like the hootie tone, that you have that little extra engagement.
Right. Yeah. Right at that point, for me, it's probably like, I don't even know where my break is anymore. It's probably changed. But yeah, when I feel that it's getting ready, it's the interesting thing is I've been doing it for so long, I don't even really think about it. It just kind of happens. But initially, you had to be very, very aware of that. And like, oh, here comes the break. Here comes where, it could all fall apart. And the beauty of the technique is if you give it enough support and you're creating the space with your soft palate, it should just happen. And it should be very free.
And it is so amazing in Watch Over You in particular, how you'll sing some parts, in that super floaty, free sound, and you'll come back and give them so much more power. But I feel like I don't hear any decline in the freedom of the voice at the same time, right? And I think that's one of the things that made me really perk up at your voice was when I heard that you're singing so high and so easily negotiating between different registers. So do you have any recommendations for people that are singing with a much higher, fuller sound, before flipping over? How do you keep it open? Because I think a lot of high voiced males in particular, they'll struggle with it kind of shutting down here. And we say, okay, well, you can do this, release the tension here, release the tension here, release the tension here. But, you kind of have to find the right thing to make it click. Was there anything that made it click for you?
Oh, it was just a number of things. I think it was, there were two things that Ron told me that really stuck with me. One of which was not to use the jaw. A lot of times you try and create the space with the jaw. So the jaw will come forward. And he said, no. So he would have me sing. We would practice the scales and arpeggios, and I would put my hand against. Yeah, I'd push it to make sure the jaw wasn't jetting out because I was trying to create the space there, like to open it up as I got higher. But really, what he wanted me to do was create it back here. It's that soft palate. And the other thing, and I don't know if this relates to what you're talking about. He was always very your little, what is this deal?
The Adam's apple right
Yeah,
there.
like
the,
with
like the
that whole-
thyroid notch. Uh-huh.
Yeah, where if that stuff starts shooting up, then you want to keep all that down as well. So it's like
Keep it chill.
Yeah, keep it chill. Yeah, it's just really from what I remember, and it's been a few years since we had our last lesson, but it really was about creating the space. It was time and time again. It was about creating the space, and in the very beginning, way back in the, this was, I think at the first few lessons I took from him was in the spring of 1997, right? So that was a long time ago. So I've had a lot of time, kids, to work through this. And it took, trust me, it took a long time. In fact, you can listen to those early recordings, even on the first Alter Bridge record, first, second, third, I was still, in my opinion, doing a lot of the technique wrong. Like I still didn't have it figured out yet. It wasn't like I just started studying this and then it was just, because I was, I just had to, night after night after night after night, I had to get up there on stage and work with the technique, and until finally it was like, oh, now I understand. But I think that the idea of adjusting the vowels as you go higher, and I don't know if you do the same thing, but it's not, you don't just sing A all the way up to the top. It changes, and then you open that soft palate. I'm not going to try and sing now; it's too early. But that was a big part of it too. Was learning how to think about those vowels and how to shift those vowels, so as you're going higher, you're not straining. And I can still, like I said, though, I can listen to the Second Skin record from Mayfield 4, and I'm like, yeah, you were raising your soft palate, but you weren't adjusting the vowels, you weren't supporting, you were just screaming.
Yeah.
And
So I specifically talk about that in a recent video in Blackbird, when that chorus, your mouth it's open, it's way more open. You can hear that you've modified those vowels to make them a lot easier to produce. And it's not just easier to produce, but it's also a nicer sound when somebody does that.
Sure. Yeah. That's the goal.
Yeah. It's a great example of really good vowel modification. I work with lots of people on soft palate too, and it can be very difficult, I think, to at first feel your soft palate and learn how to control it and all of those things. And there's a lot of false positives where you think, oh, my soft palate's up and it's actually down, right? There's those moments. So any imagery that you particularly use with your soft palate that's helpful? Yeah,
the yawning. The muscles that, like, soft palate is the same thing when you yawn. As I'm getting higher, it's kind of that sensation. And the other image, as you're raising that soft palate, is that the vowels are kind of like when I'm singing the really high stuff, it's almost like I'm shooting the vowels out of the back of my head. That's how I think about it. So I raise that soft palate like I'm yawning, and then it's kind of thinking about it as if it's shooting out the back of my head. And I think I learned that from Ron. I think that was one of the first things he might have taught me many years ago, was to try and visualize it that way. I love that. And then sometimes you get that chiaroscuro thing that they talk about that I think is so applicable to all kinds of genres. People usually talk about that when they're talking about classical singing, but where you have the bright and the dark combined, because when you have lots of space there, you have the ease of the vowels, the ease of the singing up there, but then you also get a depth of tone from having so much space. And then you have the focus point. You have little ringies sometimes up in this area. And that gives you that balance with that bright ring and that deeper sound at the same time. Right. Because you're creating the space, but you're also engaging your mask, right? You're keeping that nasal air. Yeah, you want, that's a really big part of it too. I don't think I realized it for a long time, was to make sure that you could hear that airiness. And I'm really, really precious about that with my monitor mix. I'm always pushing, with the monitor engineer. I'm I need to hear a lot of times guys will want to pull out all of the high frequencies. They'll say anything above like 6K. They're like, oh, but the cymbals are coming through, so we want to pull we're gonna take all of that out. But the problem is, as a singer, you rely on that because that's where you hear that real airy thing. It's that's where you're hearing your breath essentially, and so for me, if I don't hear that, if I don't have those higher frequencies to guide the breath with, then I start to clamp down. Then it starts to become. Then that tension comes in, and as long as I can hear that mask, and I know that's there, and then I can manipulate that upper register with my soft palate and the valve modification, I feel like we're good to go. We're safe.
That's super interesting. I know that's above 6K is often where we're hearing a singer's formant bump as well, where you're getting a lot more of those overtones.
Right.
And if you are aware of that and you're singing into that, that often means that you're in a really good placement and your technique is going super solid. So that makes sense that you would say, no, please don't roll off anything above 6K. Like, no. Right. Do you end up saying like above 10K instead, or what do you prefer to roll off then?
10 starts to get pretty high, and sometimes it can almost be too high for me because of my tinnitus. That can kind of screw with things, and if other instruments are bleeding into my microphone. But yeah, it's kind of like it's kind of a delicate balance, and it does depend on how loud the band is and how like this drummer is, how hard he hits the cymbals. And some of the people who've come to some of the shows have noticed that oftentimes drummers that I'm performing with will have like a plexiglass thing in front of the cymbals or maybe in front of the whole kit. And I always feel bad asking the drummers to do that because I feel like it's not really rock and roll, and sometimes they feel like they live in a fishbowl. But it helps so much because when those cymbals, those are all those frequencies just roll right into here. And oftentimes the front of house guy, the engineer who's mixing the whole show, he'll come and he'll be like, with some of these with some drummers, he's like, I don't even have to use the microphones on the cymbals. I can just use your vocal mic. That's how much cymbals are coming through the mic sometimes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, depending on the room, depending on how big the room is. Now, if we're in an arena, it's different. Then everybody has space and everything's fine. But it's when you're in like a theater, or if you playing in more of like a club environment, and then the cymbals are hitting the ceiling and they're bouncing right back down and they're going into your microphone, and then you're fighting to hear your mask. You're fighting to hear where your breath is, and then it's like, it's a real challenge. Yeah.
It's so interesting to hear you talk about it too, because I don't have much experience singing with cymbals behind me. So, I would think a lot. I mean, yeah, it happens sometimes, but orchestral cymbals are very different from rock cymbals and drum kits, right?
But I'm sure you have plenty of. I mean, orchestras are loud. I mean, there's a lot of volume there, right? Are there certain instruments that you hear that will sometimes interfere with where you're going, like maybe in a higher register, or is it?
The biggest thing to be concerned about is if the brass is playing and you're singing in a lower register, and how much volume then you need to pump out to get over the brass.
Right.
But honestly, one of the main problems singing with orchestra is timing, because often they're in a different spot from the stage, and we're getting the response back from the auditorium coming to us because we don't have in-ears, right, to work with. So with orchestra, the most beautiful moment, I think, is the Sitzprobe, which is where you sit down and you sing with the orchestra right there around you, and you're putting it all together the first time. And if you're in a concert where the orchestra is right there with you, it's great. But when it's in an opera stage and the orchestra is often situated in a different place from where the scene is taking place, then it's just like, oh man, it depends so much on the conductor to try and make sure the timing is correct.
Right. Yeah, I bet that's that's a whole different world, and I see what someone like yourself does there, and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. That's just such a it's just a different realm, and so yeah, that's awesome.
Well, yeah, I think it's so interesting to like understand that there's some more layers too. Obviously, I think it's so cool, and hearing the way I've gotten to dive into rock and metal, which is something I didn't grow up with. and explore that and understand more and more about the intricacies of it. That has been amazing for me. I have so much admiration.
Well, that's awesome. There's so many amazing genres, and music is, it's not just one thing. And I think that as artists, allowing ourselves to try and learn about other artists and genres and styles, I feel like then you can take it into your own realm where you normally would navigate, and maybe use it, maybe, and it makes you rethink things. And yeah, I love that. I love having an open mind and absorbing as much as you can.
And ultimately, I think as far as vocals go, like, it's the same basis. It doesn't really matter what genre you're singing in. You have the same fundamentals, which is based on the breath, right? That's the first thing.
Right.
You breathe, and then you phonate, and then you shape it some way.
Exactly.
And those things do interconnect as well. But ultimately, like, the really fine points on how you're shaping, and sometimes like some fine points with phonation and adding distortion on top of that, those are the things that determine more genre and style. But the breath is going to be the same.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting too with the grit or the distortion, and that's something that I used to do more of when I was younger. I as a rock singer, that's such a part of it. It's kind of like, it's the same thing with a guitar amp. We like, as a rock guitarist, I like to turn up the gain and work the kind of just bring in that color. But for me personally, I noticed this, the more that I did that, the more it was taxing my voice. And I noticed I was able to hit notes one night, and then the next night I do the same thing, and it would still be there, it'd be fine. But I was like, I'm going a little flat now. I'm getting a little tired. So what I've had to learn to do is to really embrace singing with more of a pure tone. And it's just, I think it's just the way that my voice is. And I love the way the voice sounds when you add that grit to it, when you have that kind of, for lack of a better word, distortion. But I just discovered that, well, the way I'm put together, and for me to be my authentic self as a singer, I'm going to keep these tones a little more pure. And and it helped with my range and helped with my pitch and whatnot. But then I hear guys like Devin Townsend, who's like, I love what he does, because he's got all that. He can do the pure thing, but he also has this awesome, like, whatever it is that he does, which is killer. And he can just do that at the, he can just, like, he just turns on a switch, and it's incredible. So, I like it when singers can combine those things as well. That's really, really awesome.
Yeah. Devin is also just such a cool and genuine person.
Yeah.
Really good guy.
He seems really cool. I've never met him. I would love to meet him. He seems like just a really amazing individual, for sure.
Yeah, and you guys aren't too far away from each other too.
I think he's Canada, right?
Yeah, he's in Vancouver, or close by.
Right on.
Right? It seems like a very logical combination.
Well, we'll see.
Right. That's fun. I think a lot of times our voices, like, to be in this prime condition, we have to think about how to take care of them ahead of the performance. So, right, no spicy food. Do you have any other pre-performance routines that you do for warming up, or do you have like anything in particular you will eat or will not eat, et cetera, et cetera?
I have the 2-hour rule, so no food 2 hours prior to the show.
Oh,
yeah, that's a really important one. Yeah. Nothing that's going to be heavy, and nothing that's going to, like, no carbonated beverages, because that, has that air, and then you're like, I don't want to go for that high note and then I'd be worried about belching at the same time. So that's out of the cards. Generally I cut it off at 2 hours prior to the show, and then I warm up. And I used to do really long warm-ups before I felt like I had a good understanding of the technique, when I was kind of doing the technique wrong, which was for years. I would warm up for up to like an hour to 90 minutes, which which was interesting because I had a tour manager once, and he finally, after listening to me every day, and it probably drove him crazy, he was just like, you do realize you're probably kind of taxing your voice for the show itself. And I was like, that's actually a really good point. So I've calmed down considerably. Now I have a routine where if I'm feeling good, if I feel like everything is kind of in its place, and as you know, it can get out of its place, and then you have to kind of it's almost like you have to reset it.
Yeah.
So if everything's set where it needs to be from the night before, and everything's working, which is not as often as I would like given the amount I tour, but then it's about a 9-minute warm up. That's about what I do. Yeah.
That's a really good amount.
Yeah. It's just, I just keep it real simple. And I take one of the old warm ups. It was like I don't know if I'm trying to remember which one I used. It's like the 15th lesson I took with Ron, and I have recordings of all of them. So I took just the very beginning of that. And then if I'm feeling a little tight or placement's not right, then I'll go 15 minutes. And so I'll just do that warm up a little bit longer, and that usually puts it where it needs to be. So and then I let it rest for about, I don't know, an hour before the show. And I try not to talk. You know where I'm going with this. Talking is the killer for us. Like it takes the edge off. It gets harder for that. It's almost like it adds a weight for me. And so I just kind of shut up and go away.
Yeah, I know that singing opera all the time really shifted how I spoke. So I think I talk with like a lot more space in my sound now, and a lot more ease on the voice generally. Every now and then I'll catch a little fry creeping in, and I'm like, go away, right?
Right. So you try and keep it higher. I mean, it's not here as much.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like I have, like, I think about it like it's like a bit of a dome with the soft palate, and sort of like that back pharyngeal space. So I have a lot of space that's just consistently engaged now. And that makes it so that when I talk, it feels like I'm just almost singing sometimes in sort of like the middle lower voice. But that was something I think that shifted very slowly over many years, because I was so tired of not talking at all between performances and shows.
Right. That's actually a really good point. I should try and integrate that more, because I hear even during the interview, I've been writing a ton, and a lot of times when I write, I'm not as concerned about my technique. So I'll just be playing, and then I'll just like, I hear a melody, and I'm sitting kind of weird. And so oftentimes I'll be singing incorrectly as I'm writing, which taxes the voice. So today we're talking, and my voice is already a little tired from all the writing. And I realize at times during the interview, I'm doing a little bit more of this and because I'm not thinking about it. But hearing you talk about being very cognizant of what you're doing throughout the day, I think I need to integrate that a little bit more, where I'm talking I'm a little higher, I'm keeping it a little higher, a little softer,
Right.
I'm floating as opposed to trying to do my Barry White impersonation.
Right. No, I think that for a while I was actually probably speaking too high, because I was told, I should speak higher to match the voice. And I think that's probably because I was singing roles that were actually probably not the best fit at one point. I was singing like high coloratura roles when my voice had shifted down with age and just genetics, right? And got much larger, much thicker in sound. And I was trying to talk up here before, and it actually caused more strange to not speak at the optimal speaking pitch. But there's a really cool trick that a friend of mine who's a speech pathologist taught me, which is to just clear your throat and go, and wherever you clear those pitches, that's your optimal speaking
really?
tone. Yeah. Right? Isn't that cool?
Oh, wow. That's cool. I learned something. I love this. That's amazing.
I thought it was so neat. And so I use that sometimes now, and just, I think it's so cool. There's other things too to help with that. Counting backwards, or saying the alphabet backwards, I think is another technique that speech pathologists will use to try and find a good speaking pitch.
So counting back, so 10, 9, 10,
I know, but you're so aware of it now. You have to do it to somebody when they're not thinking about it.
All right.
But yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I know what you mean. Before performance, like definitely not speaking loudly, like at a bar or something. That would just that's one of the things that actually is most damaging to singers after a show. Speaking really loudly at a bar. Often, if you are going to have some damage, it's done after the show because your folds are already engorged with blood. You know, because you've been singing for a long time. That's normal.
Right.
And then you go to a bar and you speak without good technique over everybody, and that's when you have things like hemorrhages more likely to occur.
That's actually a really great point. You know, for me, the problem is you'll do the show and then you get on the tour bus, and the tour bus, as it's humming down the road, the noise floor is pretty loud.
Yeah.
You know, it's up there. And so we're all, you know, hanging out on the bus, talking about the show, and you're talking pretty loud. So I try now, I do the show and I generally just try to beeline, and go to bed as soon as I can. And just because I do love this. I love to converse with people. I love talking and learning and laughing. But after a show, yeah, you're absolutely right. You kind of leave yourself wide open because of the state of, you know, what you've been doing for the last 2 hours with your vocal folds, and you should just try and let it rest. Now, do you do warm downs?
Yeah, sometimes. I would say I should probably do them more often. Yeah, absolutely. Do you do warm downs as well?
I do sometimes. I you know, it kind of depends. And the jury's out for me. I haven't figured out if they totally work for me or not. I find that the best thing is generally to try not to talk too much after a show, but that's hard because oftentimes like manager will be like, "Oh, I've got so-and-so here to meet you, or so-and-so, you know, from the label came, or your agent's here." And that's part of, it's business. It's a music business. And this is part of the thing. But I always feel bad because as I'm talking so much, as I'm engaging after a show, I'm always thinking the same thing, which is, "Oh goodness, is this going to affect tomorrow's show?" You know, please don't affect tomorrow's show. Because I kind of live to deliver. That's why I get up every morning. I want to make sure that the show is good for the people who are coming. You know, they're paying their hard-earned money to see the band, and I don't want to let them down. So, but I'm human, you know, and like we were talking about earlier, we carry these with us at all times, and we can't just put them away other than going to sleep or just not talking. But that's hard, you know?
Yep. Yeah, it is super hard. I feel like one of the questions I usually save for the end, but I'll just mention it now. I always like to ask, what's the hardest and also the best thing about your profession? And I feel like we're hitting on the hardest part. Like, really.
Yeah.
But what do you think the best part of the profession is?
I think it's those moments, and we talked about that earlier, when you see it, you see the effect it's having on your fellow human. You know, you see how it's either making someone smile or making someone cry tears of joy, or it's that power. You realize the power that the music has, and you are ultimately the thing channeling it at that moment. And so that's a big responsibility, but it's a wonderful responsibility. and I think I speak for both of us. We're grateful for that responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I also want to ask about collaborators too. Speaking of reaching other humans, like sometimes the people that you collaborate with are the people you impact the most. So what do you think, especially because you have like a huge list of people you've collaborated with and very wide range. So what do you think makes a good collaborator?
It's a good question. I think probably somebody that isn't precious with their ideas. I think it's somebody who's open-minded and kind of leaves their ego at the door. I think that is that's a very important, especially as far as being a songwriter. You're there to serve the song, both of you, or the three of you, or however many of you are doing it. And oftentimes with songwriting, as you're presenting ideas, and I've been guilty of this, trust me, you present something with a certain amount of expectation or ego, and that's you don't want that. That's not going to be I think that's not the thing that's going to help you get to your goal, which is a great song. You just have to really be hyper aware that you're there to serve it. It's not there to serve you and your little ego.
That's awesome. What a great response. Yeah. Thank you. Don't be precious with your ideas and serve the song, not your ego.
Yeah. That's it.
Great. Really, really great. And I also was curious, especially because I know you recently spoke about in-ear monitors and the dangers of them. Is there any piece of technology that you think has really changed or shaped the music industry since you've been doing it, or that you feel is very important, a huge advance that's been made?
I personally feel like it's the in-ear monitor. I think that for me, that's what's allowed me to continue to do this. If in-ear monitors didn't exist, I probably would not, with my tinnitus and all of that, I probably would have hung it up in my early 30s. But they've allowed me to go out there and not have to push too hard, and it helps me utilize as a rock musician. You know, it's because it's so loud on those stages, and so if you have a controlled environment to monitor yourself in, you're great. You're good to go. You can survive. Yeah. You know, that's why I have such respect for, say, someone like Robert Plant. Like, I watch those videos of Led Zeppelin playing in the early 70s when they were barely monitors at that point. A lot of times they were using, you know, I don't know the specifics for all of the rock artists back then, but from what I've been told by engineers who kind of been in the game for a long time, it's like, yeah, a lot of times you didn't even have wedges on the floor. You were just kind of basing it off of what was coming through the mains. I'm like, whoa, that's incredible. That's incredible that you could sing like that in that environment. So yeah. But then fast forward to the it's probably the mid 90s, I guess, that the genesis of the in-ear monitor started to kind of take shape, and now they've got it just, I don't want to say perfected, but more or less perfected, you know, with what they've done with the technology. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty crucial.
Absolutely.
That's really cool. I want to let's go to some patron questions, because we have some pretty cool ones. Quirky Uncle Dave wants to know.
Right? I love it. I love it.
You have a long history as both a vocalist and a guitarist. I know a couple of other performers who are excellent at both, but have said that sometimes they wish they could just focus on one or the other. Have you had any similar feelings over the years? And how do you balance practice time between singing and playing?
That's a great question. Yeah. I think I'm actually really grateful to have both. I think I don't really practice singing anymore. I mean, the only time I would really practice was when I was trying to learn the technique or warming up and all that. So it's kind of there now. I just call on it when I need to. But as a guitar player, though, yeah, I'm still really into trying to develop that and get better. And I'll sit there with the instructional tapes or tapes. Instructional videos. Oh, you know, geez.
Oh, tapes.
Tapes. You remember those tapes?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm still very hungry to learn and to get better there. So I love that. So yeah, I wouldn't trade either one of them. You know, I'm super happy to have both. And then in conjunction with the songwriting, I feel like that's the trifecta. That's the yeah. That's what helps. I think it's helped me have a career. So,
I mean, you could have a career on just your voice. I'm not super knowledgeable about guitar, but you could have a career just on your voice too. It's pretty fantastic.
Thank you.
But I think that having all of those things fold together and create the songwriting, it's great.
It's fun. It's a lot of fun. I genuinely, and you know what's interesting too, is that I just love it so much, and I don't know what I do without it. Like if I did just sing and I didn't have those other outlets, I don't know what I would do with so much of my day. And my whole day revolves around grabbing a guitar. You know, I'll get up in the morning, exercise, do what I do, meditate, whatever, and then where's the guitar? And let's get to work and let's create something. And one of my mottos is a day without making music is a wasted day.
Ah,
So yeah, it's I think I saw somebody had that on their, this is a long time ago. Somebody had posted that on their Facebook, and I thought, or not the Facebook, I'm sorry, their MySpace. And I thought, that's a great quote. I'm going to live my life by that quote.
Yes, that's a great quote. I like that quote. Okay. Andre Munari would like to know, I remember your participation at the end of the movie Rockstar, when an unknown young man is invited to take the place of the band's lead singer. Now that you're a great rock star, do you remember when you felt a similar emotion of your character in the movie?
Oh, geez.
It's such a good question, right?
It's a great question. Well, you know what's really fascinating about that movie is that it kind of became my life. Like,
yeah.
It's so strange. Like, so there are moments where I'm like, I'll be standing on a stage in an arena somewhere and I'll be like, I feel like Thor, God of Thunder, like, like, how did this all happen? This is crazy. Cause when I was part of that, when I did the film, and that was in 2000, I think we shot it in 2000, or maybe it was in 2000, early 2001 when we shot this stuff. Mm-hmm. I didn't know where things were going to go from a career standpoint. Mm-hmm. I had for all I knew, I was going to be back teaching guitar. And I did, actually. I went back to teaching guitar for a few years after that. I got married and started teaching guitar again. And then 2004 on, then suddenly, put the rock and roll cleats back on and get back in a tour bus and here we are. So yeah, life has really turned out much differently and probably way better than I thought it would. I never had any delusions of grandeur growing up, and I was never taught to I don't say this in a bad way, like towards my folks, because they were always just very, very, very realistic, which is great. I think that's a good thing. So you don't end up being disappointed. So the idea of shooting for the stars was not like in the narrative at our house. It was about being practical and realistic, which was cool. So as time has gone on, somehow I got just stupid lucky. I worked hard and I got lucky, and it's all kind of, here we are. So I'm great. I'm happy. Yeah.
I love that you say folks.
My folks.
I feel like folks is a very central Washington, Eastern Washington
it is, right?
thing to say.
Right?
I was like,
that is so
you said folks.
They're nice folks. Yeah, that is very central Washington, or Eastern Washington as well. I don't know if they say that in Seattle, but we definitely get a lot of that around here.
Yeah. It feels like it's kind of the other side of the state.
Right.
It's funny. Anyhow. Thanks. Kirby would like to know, if you could change one thing in the music industry, what would it be?
Oh man, that's a great question too.
No, they're just good questions.
If I could change one thing in the music industry, what would it be? Gosh, I don't, probably it can be pretty cutthroat. Like that's the thing that sometimes is kind of a bummer. Like there is an element sometimes of I wish people were, and I'm not referring necessarily to other artists as much as just within the industry, you hear stories about things that people do to each other and kind of like, there's certain, and that's just characters, the human flaws. I wish some of those didn't exist, but that's part of I guess that's business. That's just how business works. But the other thing I would say is early morning, like, oftentimes when you do radio interviews, it can be really early and you're not firing on all cylinders, and then you say something really stupid, which I tend to do even when it's 3:00 in the afternoon. Insert foot in mouth. That's me. So yeah.
Or when it's like 7 a.m. and they're like, okay, sing a high note.
All right. Yeah, I actually put a stop to that a long time ago. They were early on. They were like, "Oh, well, this radio station, they want you to come and sing some songs." And I'm like, "What is it like at 3 in the afternoon?" Like, "No, they want you there at 8 in the morning." And I'm like, Oh, this will be interesting. So
Right? Yeah, those are rough timings on
right.
interviews.
I don't do much of that anymore, but they're coming up, kind of building the brand and early on, yeah, there was a fair amount of that.
Yeah, well, because you were mentioning you're working on a new album right now, so it's about to rev up, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always the funny thing between all three projects. I've got the solo project, and then the
Yeah.
Alter Bridge, and then with Slash the Conspirator. So it's almost like I'm always writing. So right now, I'm deep in the creative woods, working on the next Alter Bridge record. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. And we haven't really touched on Slash and the Conspirators, and that's partly because I had a couple patron questions about
All right.
it. So, actually, I'm really curious. Do you have a favorite collaboration with Slash that you've done?
Yeah, I would probably say there's a song called Anastasia that we have off the Apocalyptic Love record. And I think that's actually a kind of a fan favorite as well. There's just something about that track I've always appreciated. I think it's one of his finest moments as a guitar player. So I always love just to hear him play it. The funny thing about that song is that hook, the main part of that song, was he started playing that about 2 years prior to when we made that record. He would do like these kind of unaccompanied solos. He'd like play, and that was a little motif he had. And so when we started demoing the Apocalyptic Love record, I remember he'd somehow taken that concept and put it into a song and sent me a demo, and then I added the vocals and whatnot. And when it was all said and done, I was like, yeah, that's money. I like that.
That's awesome. That is, I've been considering doing some sort of reaction analysis to one of your collaborations. So that might be the next one. We'll see.
Cool.
So speaking of Slash, Dwayne wants to know, are there any good stories behind declining the initial offer to join Slash in Velvet Revolver?
Well, I never, the interesting thing is they didn't officially ask me to join. I think they were interested in having me audition. So, I mean, that's a big difference. So, and this was in 2002 when they first reached out, and it was during that kind of difficult period in my life.
Yeah. That's when you were taking a little bit of a break.
Yeah.
Right?
I was taking a break, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. So I just felt like I was at that point. I just wasn't in the mental space to go there. And think about it. Like, so here's a group of guys that have had all this massive success, and you're this, person hanging out here in Spokane. And, I just met my wife and I was getting ready to get married, and I just wasn't sure where things were going to go. And I felt like to throw my hat in the ring for something of that magnitude probably wasn't appropriate at that period. And everything worked out. Everything happens for a reason, I guess. And then if you'd have told me 7 years later that Slash and I'd still be making music together regardless, I guess that was the universe just saying, yeah, we're trying to hook you guys up to do something. But that just wasn't the right time. But I was so flattered that they reached out, because as a massive Guns N' Roses fan, like Appetite for Destruction, that was like the soundtrack for my my high school years. So I think it just wasn't meant to be at that point.
Yeah. I think that's a really good lesson for a lot of people too. They think if they pass up an opportunity that it'll never come around again. And I think that you need to make sure that you're ready to grasp the opportunity when it shows up. If you take an opportunity and you don't do your absolute best, then it won't come around again.
Exactly. That's a really good point. You're right, because a lot of people thought I was crazy for not doing it. But I was like, well, think about it. If I don't feel like I'm for whatever reason, I don't feel like I'm ready to do something of that magnitude, I'm probably doing myself a disservice, because it's probably not going to be, it's not going to end up like you probably desire it to end up if you're not ready, on a number of different levels. And then when the time came and that discussion happened again years later, then I felt like I was ready to go. So I apologize. That's our dog Mozart. He's a
Mozart.
Yes. he's worked up about something. I don't know what. He's
just trying to sing.
He does. We actually used to have a dog that did that. So we had a little Shih Tzu named Sigmund, and when I used to write, he would come and sit by me and he would sing along with me. It was actually pretty adorable. He came up with some great melodies, came up with some great choruses. I'm joking.
I love it when dogs sing. As long as I'm not in a recording booth and a dog is singing, right?
Right.
Right. Oh, that's cute. Well, I hope Mozart
he seems to have calmed down.
Yeah.
That's good.
Okay. Well, sort of following up on Slash a little bit, Michael Lubaloo wanted to know, how was it to sing alongside Slash? And really, how did the partnership begin? So that's the partnership beginning. I think we've talked about that a little bit, but can you elaborate, especially on those first few moments as you were starting to collaborate? Like, what did that look like? Were you sending things back and forth? Like, how did that take shape and become something awesome?
Yeah, so he reached out again in 2009. It was like probably around this time, 2009, and he asked if I'd be interested in being part of his solo record, and I said, yeah, I'd be flattered. So he sent a music bed for what would become a song called Starlight. So I got it, and then I added wrote a vocal and the lyrics and whatnot, and then sent it back to him, and he liked it. So I flew down to Los Angeles, and I remember he picked me up. I was staying at a hotel there. He shows up and he picks me up, and it was like the first time we'd officially met. And so we drove to the studio, just kind of talking about things, and recorded the song that day. I did it was, and it was cool. And then I do remember that after we completed the song, I don't know if it was that day or the next day, then we went and we hung out, and he discussed the idea of, would you be interested in touring this, for a few weeks, like in the following summer. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. That would be a lot of fun. And I knew I had a window that was available at that period. And so it would work out really well with my schedule. And I think, at least speaking for myself, I thought it was just going to be that. I thought we were going to do that record together, and then that'd be that tour for, I don't know, 6 weeks or whatever it was. And that was it. And then things started to really go well. And I remember we were in the car. We were in Spain somewhere. We're driving to like an interview, and he's like, he's so funny. He's like, I always know he's gonna kind of lay something out like a big concept when he says, so I was thinking. If he says, so I was thinking, I was like, oh, what's this gonna be? He says, so I was thinking, like, maybe we keep this going and see what happens, more or less. I mean, that's just to kind of sum it up. And I was like, yeah, this is really fun. We were really having fun together, and the band was also so. I think that was the really interesting thing dynamically is he's fantastic, but the band is also, just as far as people go, everybody gets along, and it's just a really fun, creative environment. And we're all a bunch of music nerds. Like when we're sitting on the tour bus, I think we kind of drive, I don't think everybody is hardwired this way. So, but some of us, like Todd and Brent, like total music. Well, so is Frank. Frank's the same. So is Slash. I mean, everybody just loves music, and we'll watch like music documentaries and geek out and nerd out. So yeah, we're a bunch of music nerds.
That's the best. Touring on a bus with a bunch of music nerds. That sounds
Can't ask for anything better, right?
Right? That's awesome. It's like, I'm like, hey, I get to talk with really great artists about singing. That's amazing. And you're gonna be on a bus like that whole time in person. Like, oh, that sounds so cool.
Yeah, it's fun. Rock and roll. It doesn't suck.
Right? Well, Carl and Melanie Thomas wanted to ask, how did you and David Draiman come up with the harmonies you two sang on Sound of Silence?
I think I just listened to the original recording, Simon Garfunkel, and I think I tried to just follow that harmony. And it was challenging because it's kind of it's such an incredible harmony. But I remember sitting in the back of the tour bus, learning it and rehearsing it. And we haven't talked about this much, but I am really hyper aware of rehearsing. Like you play something, you sing something over and over until it's second nature. It's that idea. And I talked about this with someone else recently of neurons that fire together, wire together. You want to do it so many times that it just becomes automatic,
Neurons that fire together, wire together.
Exactly.
Look, this is not an 8 a.m. interview, right? Like, that's going.
It's going now. It's the tea. It's got me rolling.
Your herbal tea. You're like, yeah.
Right. But yeah, it really is. And it's the same thing with singing. And I think that's something people should be aware of. This is my music teacher part coming out. But I guess, okay, so if you start learning technique as a singer, and you're like, how the heck am I going to do all this stuff in a lot? Think about the vowel going here and, tap on my P muscles and soft palate. And like, I'm barely remembering the lyrics. And what I would say is, yes, it's a lot to think about, but that goes back to the neurons that fire together, wire together. If you do it consistently enough, you practice day in and day out, then eventually you're not thinking about it anymore. It's just natural. It's as natural as picking up this cup. I don't think about picking up the cup. But those neurons have wired together, right? My body knows to do that. And it's the same thing when you're going for a really high challenging part in a song. You want to get to the point where it just happens. It's just natural. But the way to get there is through rehearsing it over and over and over and over. And that's something I also got from playing with Slash. You would think, I certainly didn't realize this, but he's very dedicated and very disciplined when it comes to practicing. He works really hard at it. Like when we have tours coming up, it's not just 3 days of rehearsal. You're in there for weeks and weeks preparing for a tour. And I think that's really important to take into consideration. It's not like this stuff doesn't just magically happen. We work at it. We work really hard at it.
That's really awesome. And I feel like that's a great message too, because some people think like, oh, the voice just happens. And no. It's like any physical training. You have to really work on coordination and then build the muscles up, and then the mental imagery as well, and the lyrics and the melody.
Yes.
Knowing it's so much that's happening. So
Absolutely.
much is happening in one moment.
Yep, it's
intense.
And
yeah, I noticed in the Sound of Silence, it did sound like you followed, was it Garfunkel's or Simon's?
I think it's Garfunkel's.
I think,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
You
I think I have
followed that
that
harmony pretty closely, but every now and then you went away from it in a really cool and different way. And I remember thinking at the time, like, wow, that's such a cool excursion from the original. And also, that harmony is so hard to sing.
It was really hard. I was actually surprised with how difficult it was.
Yeah.
And it was just really fun getting us to do that with the band. And David's so great. I mean, he's a really amazing singer. I love the quality. He's a great timbre. It's just a really very, very powerful. And so having the opportunity to blend with that was really fun. It was really, and it's just a brilliant song. It's one of those songs as a songwriter, you're like, gosh, why didn't I write that song?
It's such a good song.
It's so good.
It's so good. Well, I mean, yeah, it's really good. It was a beautiful rendition that you two did together.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. Well, I think that's going to bring us kind of starting to wrap things up. I want to make sure that people know how to support you the most. So you were talking about an album that's coming up, and with this day and age, sometimes people think that we're supporting artists in a really good way, and actually, 70% of that is going to somewhere else and not to the artist. So what things can we do that will support you directly the most?
Oh, I appreciate that. Well, I mean, I've got, my socials, the official Myles Kennedy and all of that. But Yeah, I've got lots of music out there. If you know, I've got solo. I just put out my second solo record, The Ides of March, and then the first solo record, Year of the Tiger. And I'm in a little band called Alter Bridge, and we've got a few records. We've been a band now for a long time, and then Slash and the Conspirators. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot out there now. So if you have a free moment and you want to check any of it out, and you know, if you're not familiar with who I am, I would appreciate it. But I just appreciate you taking the time to do this, and I love getting to talk about music and talk about the vocal stuff more, I think, in depth, and really dive into kind of how the mechanics of it work. I never get to do that. So people, and for me, it's so important that people understand, just like we were talking about a few minutes ago, which is that it's something that had to be developed. Yeah, I could sing to a degree. There was a certain natural ability, but then there's the developing of it, and that takes years and years and a lot of discipline, and it's just a matter of being tenacious and sticking with it. And I hopefully the people who are watching this or listening to this will get that from this conversation, that we both agree that this is a lot of work, and how bad do you want it? And if you want it bad enough, you'd be pretty surprised what you can achieve.
That again, great messaging. I mean, especially for not 8 a.m., right? It's just, that's really, really wonderful. I appreciate that. And if we're going to look you up on a platform, do you see best return from somewhere like YouTube or Spotify or iTunes, or should we buy your merch, see you in concert? Which one is the best one for you?
Well, you go to MylesKennedy.com, and you know, that's where a lot of the I guess that's the hub, or alterbridge.com. It's tricky with me because there's not one thing, and there's so many different ones. But I have official Myles Kennedy Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, and yeah. So maybe that's, you know, if you just want to see some of my silly pictures, Instagram.
You're like, here's Mozart.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe I'll take a picture of Mozart and put it up.
Okay, good. Okay, that's really helpful to know too, to direct to website, and also it sounds like just sharing and getting word out is a really, really good way to help.
Yeah, absolutely.
You make fantastic music, so we want to make sure that is spread as much as possible.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. That's really awesome.
Well, thank you so much for taking time today and for the lovely conversation. I feel like there was so many different things I learned. It was really, really cool. So,
well, I did too. And thank you so much. This has been just really cool. Really cool.
Appreciate it. Cheers to you.
Cheers to you.
Cheers.
Cheers.